First Ward is basically the cradle of Buffalo's history.
It was right on the waterfront. That's where the economic heart and the soul of the city was.
The neighborhood, the residences grew up around the workplace.
And it was a great place to live and find the American dream.
The First Ward is a microcosm of the history of America. This old First Ward neighborhood was really the seat of many families' American experience.
Buffalo's First Ward is made possible by the members of WNED TV. Thank you.
We are at historic Silo City in Buffalo, New York, on the Buffalo River. We're in a neighborhood called the Old First Ward. It's a fantastic historic place. The First Ward is basically the cradle of Buffalo's history. It's essential to the building of Buffalo and to it becoming big. And so when we think about what is the essence of the city of Buffalo, the grain elevators and the grain transshipment that related to the Erie Canal is a huge part of that. When I first came to this place several years ago, I just felt the gravity of history here and how important it was.
City of Night is an annual arts event that connects the First Ward's rich history to its emerging future.
City of Night's role is to show people what's possible. Ready? Yeah! Ready? To remind them of the importance of this place. Make a wish! It's relevant as ever because I think that right now, Buffalo is in this very kind of inward-looking, reflective place, and I think that people are really kind of wondering where do they fit in. I want people to know about the First Ward's importance in Buffalo's overall history. I want them to know that it is a place of very vital importance to Buffalo's growth, and without the Old First Ward, it just never would have happened.
The First Ward and the waterfront became the center of Buffalo's industrial growth.
The thing that made Buffalo was the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825. And that made Buffalo a transshipment port, a place where cargoes were transferred from one mode of shipment to another. It was the place where the Erie Canal opened the Great Lakes to the East Coast. So it made Buffalo. Buffalo grew exponentially through the 19th century, just massive increases. And you can date that to 1825 and especially the 1830s and the 1840s. Not coincidentally, that's when the First Ward really started growing too, is in the 1830s.
Many immigrants were drawn to the opportunities in the First Ward.
They were unskilled laborers. There was work for them on the waterfront, and I think that's what drew them to the waterfront.
The position that many people think of when they think of the First Ward is the scoopers. These are people that worked in the hulls of ships or they worked on rail cars, and it was their job to move the grain closer to the conveyor to transport it up into the elevator where it was then dried and sorted. So thousands of workers, many Irish laborers worked in the hulls of ships getting the grain up into the elevators.
The grain industry created many jobs, but for workers in the First Ward, it was a difficult way to make a living.
I can remember the scoopers, when they would get out, they'd be all covered with dust, and they would have their pants tied up and their masks up over their head walking down the streets, or going to a tavern and have a drink after work.
You had a little break at lunchtime where you maybe went to a saloon and had some beer to kind of clear your throat of the grain dust, and then you were back at it, and then maybe you went back to the saloon after work, because it was really backbreaking work. It certainly was better than where a lot of them had come from in Ireland, but you couldn't become rich on it. It was still kind of a hand-to-mouth existence.
First Ward is you know, it's sort of the backs on which Buffalo was built. The majority of the wealth created in Buffalo was from the grain industry. There were more mansions on Delaware built on the backs of the First Ward than anybody knows. The First Ward, you know, built the city in a way.
The grain industry and the jobs it created continued to grow. Shipbuilding and later railroads created even more jobs. Other industries like steel and chemical manufacturing made Buffalo one of the most important industrial centers in the country. While the industrial expansion brought over a century of prosperity to the First Ward, the boom didn't last forever.
I think a real killer for the First Ward was the enhancement and completion of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959 that killed eventually the grain trade, which in effect closed a lot of the grain elevators and mills. So that had a large impact on the First Ward.
The St. Lawrence Seaway is still something that we as a city are trying to bounce back from. It was devastating to the city, even more so to the First Ward. And slowly, by the mid-1960s, you start to see elevators that were formerly bustling closing up, and that continued through the 1970s into the early 1980s.
Back in the heyday, you'd have 500 vessels a year, or maybe so up to 50 a day. By the late part of the 20th century, you'd be down to maybe 50 vessels a year.
The First Ward fell on hard times. Despite the economic decline, the spirit of the First Ward survived.
So we're standing here at the corner of O'Connell and Kentucky Street, right in the heart of the old First Ward. My great-great-grandfather, Timothy Bowen, was one of the pioneers on this street. He bought his land and built his house in about 1874, and he was very typical of the other immigrants that arrived in this part of the First Ward. Many of them were illiterate farmers or fishermen who came from the south and west of Ireland to look for plentiful jobs along Buffalo's waterfront. People stayed, as my family did, for 3 generations in the same house. Many families stayed even longer because of this tight-knit community, one that supported each other. And it was a great place to live and find the American dream.
I'm originally from Illinois, moved here 13 years ago. Was looking for property, came across the bakery.
4 of those rolls.
I knew the First Ward was starting to get improvements. I just found it very interesting that it's been in the old First Ward for over 80 years, so I would be able to continue on with the heritage of the bakery.
You're all set. Thanks, Ty. See you in the morning.
Have a good day.
Father and mother started the business in 1933. Then Carol and I, we took over in 82. So together we stuck it up until 2011. The children didn't want the business, and there was not really anybody that was doing that type of work, everything from scratch. That's when Ty came in one day and says, I want your business.
Missouri's Bakery is typical of the small family-owned businesses that populated the old First Ward. Today, it is one of the few that remains.
People were very hesitant at first about having someone just come in and start taking over. In the old First Ward, I mean, once you know a couple of people, they let their neighbors know. It got around the neighborhood and people continue to start coming in more often. And we have a lot of people from out of town stop into the old First Ward just to pick up a loaf of bread that their grandparents used to purchase from the bakery. Absolutely. Good rye bread.
I don't like to say that Buffalo is a small-town city. I like to say that Buffalo is a city of small towns. It's very neighborhood by neighborhood.
First Ward and the Valley are great old neighborhoods. A lot of heritage there, a lot of history there.
The First Ward is one of the most enduring blue-collar neighborhoods in America. The closeness of the neighborhood was created by the unique intermingling of residential and industrial structures.
That is one of the unique things about the First Ward, this intimacy between the residential and the industrial, where you would literally have houses just a couple of feet away from railroad tracks.
The older inner-city neighborhoods overlapped residential and commercial and industrial. So people lived where they worked. There was no separation of spaces.
The neighborhood, the residences grew up around the workplace.
There was never a question as to where Daddy worked. I mean, all you had to do was look out the window and you could see. I mean, you could look out the window on those streets in the First Ward and you see those grain elevators, you see the railroad tracks.
So really a unique place. A lot of the people that lived down there had fond memories of living in that unique neighborhood.
In its heyday, the First Ward was a neighborhood in a sense that is unknown today. People could get everything they needed within walking distance.
It was self-contained. In the old days, the ward itself was broken into smaller neighborhoods. Every corner had something, either a tavern or a delicatessen, but they were all over the place.
Growing up, you had store next to store next to store, and each one had its own purpose. You had the meat market, which was the meat man. You had the bakery, which was rolls and bread.
Right here was Goslinski's, Gus's store, and across the street was Whitey's bar. On the next one was Bartell's and Daddy Haggerty's. The next one was Bill Travis and Travis's store. Clothes stores, men's stores, a bank, a jewelry store. It was all there.
This was a place where neighbors looked out for each other. You knew who people were. You knew who their parents were. You may have a married woman, but you knew her by her maiden name and she was from home. And all of that just sort of was a glue that held this community together.
Many of the things that made up the First Ward are gone. In recent years, the neighborhood has been reborn as the old First Ward. The Old Neighborhood St. Patrick's Day Parade is a symbol of that resurgence.
The neighborhood was faltering and people were moving away. I said this would be neat if we could start the parade back up on the original route, and we did. I think that was the beginning of people having an interest in coming back.
Well, the Cleary clan is representative of our great-grandparents who come over from County Tipperary area in mid-1800s. Our grandparents all lived in the same house for almost 100 years. To celebrate them and to celebrate our expanded family, we decided sort of a family reunion to march in the neighborhood parade. We get about 100 family members, about 4 or 5 generations. If you look around, you can see a lot of pride, a lot of people having a good time, celebrating, happy to see each other. It's a break from our winter, and it becomes one big reunion. And as the generation comes, people come back and they say, hey, you know what? This is nice. And it's revitalizing, especially the old First Ward.
The parade did everything we wanted it to do. The intention of the parade was to bring back people to the neighborhood and instill pride in the neighborhood, and it has done both of those.
The camaraderie and kinship displayed in the old neighborhood parade captures a feeling that has existed in the First Ward since its founding.
I know people from the ward are very proud of being from the First Ward. When people ask me where I'm from, or where I grew up, I say the First Ward. There's a certain pride in that. My parents lived down there, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. A lot of families down there go way, way back. So I think there's, pride of being part of something for 150 years.
I think the ward is one of the neighborhoods that is unique in the enduring community feeling and community pride. If you come from a place that people talk about, oh, the Shamrock Run, oh, the parade, oh, the Buffalo River and kayaking, that can give you a sense of pride in where you live. One of the unique things about Buffalo is that there's still a there. So many cities across the United States don't have roots. Buffalo, you can find your roots wherever you are. It's the shared experience of hard times, the shared experience of good times, the shared experience of getting ahead or maybe not getting ahead, helping each other.
Interpersonal relationships, interfamily relationships, the kind of social glue that holds a community together, holds a neighborhood together, knits people together as a group. Family-centered, church-centered, social-centered, job-centered to a way, but that's in decline now. But the other parts are remaining strong.
The quality of the people make it special. And just the families that have been here, it's the heritage that they bring and that they remember from the history of their individual families and as a group of immigrants.
This old First Ward neighborhood was really the seat of many families' American experience. The First Ward is a microcosm of the history of America. And yeah, quite often we look back with nostalgia. We were children. We didn't see how hard our parents worked to make that all possible, or where our grandparents came from. And it's all part of the same story. And it all makes the First Ward what it is today and what it can be tomorrow.
The old First Ward is changing. There's a lot of different cool stuff happening.
Look on the wall for your number. If you can't find it, come up here.
There's a lot of excitement. There have been slow steps, but I see things changing more rapidly now. There's just more awareness about the old First Ward, about the Buffalo River, about the grain elevators and Buffalo's historical importance. Maybe a little bit more pride in the city and an understanding that it is coming back.
Nice job, runners. Have a great race in the First Ward.
Buffalo's been struggling for years to revamp and redefine itself. And finally, it started to occur to people that we have an awful lot of waterfront.
There's no more interesting waterfront on the planet than taking a kayak or a canoe or a boat of any kind through these grain elevators. And so water will have a great deal to do with the regeneration of our neighborhood.
People like being near the water, and that's one advantage the First Ward has. It's right on the river and buffers up against the lake.
Everybody's got a new hope for Buffalo, and it's all about water.
The renewed interest in the water has created new opportunities for the First Ward. The redesigned Ohio Street corridor and several new riverfront parks have created more access to the water.
As soon as there was access, by glory, they came. It's so busy. It's absolutely incredible. It was like there was a dam and somebody removed the dam, and now here come the kayakers and the canoers and everybody else. It's really neat.
The kayakers and the rowing is unbelievable, and it's all back. And that's how it was 80 years ago.
The massive grain elevators that line the river and were once a sign of the decline have become another symbol of the resurgence of the First Ward.
You've got a whole bunch of assets that can never be recreated. It's sort of celebrating our unique resources and really keeping those alive. You want to have people come down and sort of be inspired or be awed by these structures. We sort of treat the concrete as sacred.
I like to say that the people that do come and that they get the site, they leave part of themselves here and they take part of the spirit of the site with them. Silo City is as much a concept, an idea, as it is a series of buildings.
In recent years, Silo City has become a community gathering place. One of its most visible events is City of Night. City of Night combines the arts with the rich industrial heritage of Silo City.
I think that City of Night's role is to remind them of the importance of this place.
The First Ward has been an amazing home to us. You know, they are so gracious and welcome us.
It tells me that we're on the right track, that the city and its residents want to connect with important places that are meaningful to them, and also that Silo City and its return to prominence is a symbol of Buffalo's resurgence.
Every neighborhood in Buffalo has a history, but there was something really special about the history in the First Ward. There seems to be a spirit in the First Ward. There's a real strong bond. There's also familial bonds as well. You have, multiple generations that live in the First Ward, but there's an incredible sense of community.
The First Ward is relevant as ever. There's just more awareness about the old First Ward, about the Buffalo River, about the grain elevators and Buffalo's historical importance. I hope people walk away with a little bit more pride in the city and an understanding that it is coming back.
It's not just a bunch of broken down things, and it's not a broken neighborhood. They're getting a whole new generation of people that now know where the First Ward is.
The more you bring people back to reconnect with places their families once called home, the more interest you have in this place, the more vibrancy it gives to the neighborhood, and the more the past is preserved. I think there's a real strength there. I think there's a real possibility of making this a vibrant neighborhood and still keeping its identity. There are things here worth preserving, well worth preserving, and I would hope any future development here builds on the strengths rather than seeks to replace what once was. I'd like to see it reborn as the old First Ward.
Buffalo's First Ward is made possible by the members of WNED TV. Thank you.